This is going to be the conclusion video for the Kawasaki F6A 125 project. I know I had called this a reconditioning, I think, in one of my earlier videos on this bike. It really wasn't a reconditioning. I would call it more of a maintenance process. I didn't really recondition it. I didn't do a lot of cleaning. I have to confess, I am not a great one to clean and polish. It's just not kind of my thing. I do have two friends that are very, very good at it, and they enjoy it a lot. And those guys could put a fine polish on a potato. I'm telling you, they really do a great job. But it's just not something I enjoy. I find it very boring. So I didn't do a lot of cleaning on this bike, just some fundamentals as I worked around it. So let's just do a little bit of a walkabout and talk through what I did do. Down there on that side cover, I think I had mentioned once before, right there, I'm going to repaint that cover. I do have paint that was matched from my paint supplier that I use to paint bikes. And next time I have my HVLP system out, I'm going to repaint that cover. I did have that all apart behind there, and I cleaned it thoroughly, as well as removed the chain. And I cleaned and re-lubricated the drive chain and cleaned everything down there, including the wheels. Checked the bearings in the rear wheel and the front wheel. I had the front wheel off also. Checked the bearings and the brakes, and everything was in very good condition there. So a little basic cleaning, put it back together. There's sealed bearings in both the front and rear, so I didn't really need to lubricate them. It really does need a new chain and sprockets. As far as I recall, that is the original set of chain and sprockets on this bike. And the rear sprocket is starting to hook. And if I was to use this bike regularly and ride it seriously, I would then put a new chain and sprockets on it. But since I'm just going to use it around the yard, and it will not be ridden aggressively, I'm not going to bother replacing the chain at this point. I did run into another issue, the third major issue on this bike that I was not expecting, which required me to remove the exhaust system. But first I have a question for all of you. How many of you have heard of a lean scream, otherwise known as a two-stroke runaway? Let's see a show of hands. Go ahead, let me see. I see a few hands out there. Okay. Next question, how many of you have personally ever experienced a lean scream, aka two-stroke runaway? A few hands dropped there. Looks like maybe a couple folks have experienced it. Well, I had a lean scream on this bike. And what had happened is, and I was not recording, I'm afraid. Probably would have made for an interesting recording, but I just was going to start the bike, and I put the carburetor back on, button it all up from that oil pump valve problem we talked about earlier, check valve. Put it back together, got out and started. It was a little difficult to start, which is unusual for this bike. This has always been an easy starter, even when it's been sitting for a while. And she was reluctant to start, and eventually, after probably 12 to 15 kicks, it did kind of wake up. It didn't want to idle very well, and it started to accelerate. And now when you hold the enricher down on this type of carburetor, it's normal for them to want to idle high. But it idled very high. It was idling 3,000 to 4,000 RPM, and then all of a sudden it started to gradually build RPM, and then it just took off, and it just buried the tack. Went way beyond 9,000 RPMs instantly. Well, I knew what was happening. I've experienced this a couple of times before, and it's terrifying. If you've ever had a lean scream, a two-stroke runaway, you'll know what I mean. It's absolutely terrifying. And if you don't know what to do, you could blow your motor. Quite often you'll hold a piston. And what causes it is a very lean condition that allows, essentially allows air to leak into the combustion chamber, and it draws its own fuel supply. The engine gets very hot, and it'll run with the key off. And what happened, or what I did, is when it took off on me, and I knew what was happening. I immediately turned the key off, nothing. It kept right on, it just was continuing to build RPM. I reached down, yanked the spark plug cap off, kept running. That's characteristic of a lean screen. So I knew I was in trouble. So the only solution I know of is you put it in gear, grab the clutch, put it in gear, and grab both brakes, front and rear, and ease the clutch out to stall the motor. And that's exactly what I did. Now what I just described to you happened inside of seconds. Turn off the key, pull the spark plug cap, nothing happened there. Grab the clutch in gear, grab the brakes, and ease the clutch out, and it just vroom, quit. Long story short, I had to puzzle over it a little bit. What I found, and allow me here to get a carburetor and I'll demonstrate. This is a similar carburetor in design to the one that's on this bike. This is not an F6 carburetor. This is actually a carburetor from a Kawasaki 500 triple, but the design is very similar. And what you see right here, my pinky is pointing to, is the enricher circuit. And here's the components that make up that enricher. And they fit down inside of here. And when you activate the starter circuit, the enricher circuit, it pulls up on this, let me get this here, pulls up on this plunger, which is normally down inside here, pulls up on this and allows extra fuel into the system to help start the engine. And what had happened, and this is my mistake, when I put this carburetor on the bike back together and I put this enricher back in place, and it spins in something like this. Right, there's a cable that comes in here, and this is part of the internals. I failed to tighten this up, so this was loose, and that allowed air to get in there, and that initiated the lean screen. Again, this all happens in a matter of seconds. So once I caught my breath from this little episode, what I did is I wanted to check the internal condition of the engine, because a lean screen, by definition, the engine runs very, very hot, running in an extreme lean condition, and I want to make sure there's nothing wrong inside. So I let it cool down for a few minutes, and I pulled the top end off, and of course the muffler, and that led me to pulling the piston because the lower ring was stuck, and I ended up cleaning up the cylinder, ran a hone through it. Everything looked good. It didn't have any damage. It didn't hold the piston, but I did put a new base gasket in, re-annealed the head gasket, cleaned everything up really good. I'll post a couple little pictures here, and you can see what it looked like when I opened it up, and then put it back together. And happy to report there was no permanent damage, though it did have a lot of carbon buildup in that cylinder, so it really needed to be pulled down anyway. So let's keep going here. Clean the fuel tank. I talked about that, I think, before. It was quite clean to begin with, but I did flush it again. I already mentioned the front wheel. I pulled it off. By the way, I did put new tubes, inner tubes, in both the front and the rear, so those are new. The headlight here, I can't explain it, but the adjusting screw right there was missing. I don't ever remember taking that apart, but that whole adjusting mechanism for the headlight was gone. So I ordered all new parts for that, and most of those you can actually still get from Kawasaki. There's a couple of items that were missing I got off eBay, but I was able to replace all those parts and got that back together. I cleaned and polished some of the hardware when I had it apart, such as some of the screws and the fasteners. You can see there I do have a inline fuel filter. I'm not a big user of inline fuel filters. I don't use them at all in restorations. But on this bike, since I had flushed the fuel tank, I was concerned about a little debris might remain, so I'm going to run it with that inline filter for a while, and eventually I'll pull that out once I'm confident the tank is clean of debris. And let's look underneath the seat here a minute. I have a little more work to do under the seat. This battery, by the way, is off the Suzuki TS185, the restoration project I talked about a few videos back. The Suzuki 185 and this bike take the exact same battery, so I just pressed it into service here to run this bike. By the way, on a lot of these old Enduros, even though they'll have many of them have a magneto ignition and they'll run without a battery, the engine will run. Be cautious about running it without a battery if you have lights, because the battery actually is part of the charging circuit, of course, and it acts as a buffer. And if you run some of these bikes without a battery, even though the motor will run, you turn on the lights and you'll blow all your light bulbs, your tail light, instrument bulbs, the lights that light up the meters. They'll just blow them all. So be aware of that. That's actually the main reason I put this battery in, is I want to check all the light bulbs. All the bulbs do work. Headlight, halo beam, that is original as far as I recall. Both meter lights, backlights work. Horn works. By the way, the horn button, this assembly here, I had to take it all apart because the horn was not working right. The button itself was quite corroded, so I took that all apart and cleaned it. And while I was doing that, I re-sleeved the wiring coming from that left control because it was all cracked. And I've talked about re-sleeving wiring before, and I have some videos on that out there if you'd like to take a look at that. But so I did have this all apart and cleaned it. And of course I cleaned the switch, the halo beam switch too, even though that was working before. Back to under the seat. I powder coated this is the air cleaner right here, air filter. I did re-powder coat this because it was the paint was pretty much gone, and it was getting rusty from battery acid. So I pulled it, cleaned it, media blasted it, and then powder coated that. I have a few items I'm still waiting for. I've ordered to finish up, tidy up the wiring loom, including the hold down strap for the battery. The old one just got brittle and actually fell apart. I did get a new strap here, you can see, to hold down, that's the NOS part, hold down the air cleaner cover. So I have a few little odds and ends I've got to take care of there yet, and of course I'll put the owner's manual back under the seat when I'm done under here. As I indicated, I think many of the pieces of hardware I did clean and polish. That is, I threw them in my parts tumbler. You can see the rear brake arm, some of the hardware down there was polished since I had it off anyway. The license plate from 1982, I'm going to leave it on the bike. I did take it off. Had a few little wrinkles in it. I don't know what caused that, whether I dropped the bike in the past or bumped it as I was moving around, but I straightened the plate and put new stainless steel hardware on to hold it in place. I intentionally did not remove the label adhesive from the original dealer sticker that was on here. Of course, the dealer sticker itself is long gone, but I thought I'd just leave the adhesive for nostalgia reasons. And that's pretty much it, I think. So what I think I'll do right now is I'll go ahead and start it. You can hear it run. Now this bike has not been run today. I did ride it quite a bit yesterday. In the afternoon, I rode around my property, and everything seemed to work fine. So let's see if we can't get it started. So I'll have to reset up the camera and give you a shot of that. Well, I think that's going to be it for the 1972 F6A Kawasaki 125. I'm going to now use it for the summer, the balance of the summer, just right around the yard from time to time. So I'll be keeping fuel in it, and then next fall I'll drain the tank, drain the carburetor, run it dry, and winterize it, of course, and keep it in my heated shop and put a cover over it until next spring when I get it out and use it as just a putter around the yard kind of bike. It will never get used seriously again. It will certainly never get used on the road. A couple things to wrap up there underneath the seat with the battery, and I talked about earlier. Other than that, I'm going to consider this project a wrap. Any issues, thoughts, questions, drop me a note. Otherwise, as usual, thanks for watching.